The Golden Age of Comic Books, month number 10, ties in with the 10th appearance of Superman and Action Comics number 10 being on the newsstands. All these comics have a cover date of March 1939. Today we're going to analyze everything on the newsstands at that time. There were 21 different comics released this month. 20 of them actually hit the newsstands because the one at the top of the list, Radio Funnies, was an ashcan comic made by DC Comics but never actually for sale. This is a very rare book. And this month we got the #1 issue, though never publicly released. And therefore it has a hefty price tag because it's super rare. Only less than 10 copies were likely printed of this book and never sold. So when we look at our chart here, we're going to look for certain highlights for the month. First of all, let's look at some facts about CGC graded books. On the entire list, we find that Action Comics number 10 is by far the most graded book on the list, with 30 copies graded and one even in super high grade of 9.0 or higher. And this is partially due to the fact that it is the 10th appearance of Superman. It is also the 3rd cover appearance ever of Superman, and therefore it is one of the 10 most valuable comic books of all time. Look at the hefty price tags in the Overstreet price guide. $17,000 for a low-grade copy and $225,000 in high grade. And of course, this book goes up in price every year. This is one of the hottest, highest demand books of all time. Superman early issues always in high demand, and especially Superman cover appearances. What else do we see on the chart? Well, if we look at the other books that have the most copies graded, we see Detective Comics number 25 is got 11 copies, and Crackerjack Funnies number 9 has 14. So those are the two kind of more common books. Everything else is less than 10, and many of them are only 3, 4, or 5. And in fact, there were 2 comics this month that have 0 copies graded by the CGC in any condition. And this chart even includes restored and qualified copies. And we find that Feature Funnies number 18 and Ace Comics number 24 both have 0 copies graded. Now this is actually most likely due to the fact that these are 2 of the cheapest books of the year, so there's not much profit margin for dealers to sell these particular books, and therefore people just haven't bothered to get them graded. But keep in mind, these books are also extremely scarce, and that's another reason why they just haven't popped up, because usually higher grade copies will get graded because there is some profit to be made in the high grades. But again, these books are scarce and not moving up at a fast pace in the price guide year to year. If we look at the cheapest books of the month, we find Ace Comics number 24 not only has 0 copies graded by the CGC, but it's also the cheapest book in low grade, $36 for an 80-year-old comic, and that ties with Tip Top Comics number 35, which is also worth $36 in the Overstreet price guide. And both of those books are worth under $500 in high grade, but keep in mind that there are no high grade copies, so you'll be on a big hunt for years possibly to find a decent copy of any of these books. If you look at what is graded by the CGC in high grade, you'll see that half the books on this list do not have a single high grade copy. The most common book with high copies is Super Comics number 10 from Western Comics. And the reason for this is that Western used to actually keep file copies for business purposes, and that is why probably 1 or 2 of those have survived from the file copies. And that is also, you'll note that Crackerjack Funnies number 9, also from Western, has 2 copies, and so those could also be file copies. Detective Comics number 25, which just happens to be the 6th appearance of the Crimson Avenger, an early superhero. There is, by luck, 2 copies graded high grade by the CGC. Now, what else do we note that's interesting this month? Centaur Comics still had the most titles, as they usually did, but it's the DC books that also, predictably, have the highest price tag values. DC had 5 books on the list this month, keeping in mind that Radio Funnies was an ashcan and not really for sale. So 4 books on the newsstand plus the ashcan. And if we look at the price tag of those, we'll see that the DC books comprise almost the entire value of buying a run of all of the books on this list. So you'll see that if you total up all 21 books listed, it would cost $21,000 to buy a low-grade set. But if you take away Action Comics number 10 and Detective Comics number 25, the two most valuable books of the month, and then take away the Radio Funnies Ashcan, we're left with, you can buy the other 18 books on the list, all for under $1,000 or under $2,000 for sure. And so that's kind of interesting. Of course, DC's got all the big names and starting to establish superheroes at this time in some of their titles. What else do we notice looking at this chart? Centaur had recently relaunched many of their titles, so they were on issues number 2 and 3 of their titles, but not the first volume. Now we're up to volume 2 or volume 3 on their titles. And all pretty scarce, though, still on the CGC census, even though after the DC books, the Centaur books are the most valuable. Little Abner, number 1, was the single series feature of the month in single series number 4 from United Features. That's got a heftier price tag. What else do I notice here? Mickey Mouse Magazine number 42 usually had file copies, also from Western, and that might be the reason there is one copy of that in high grade existing. So two comics on the list have 0 copies graded. The 21 comics this month, tied with the number of titles also released last month. At this point, over 500 different comics had been published in the standard modern format since it was established in 1933. So now we're already into 6 years, and now we've got 500 comics out. So 20 of these comics were on the newsstands. If we just go with a guess of how the print run, and we use an average of 200,000 copies per issue, that means there were 4 million comics on the newsstand this month. Out of the 4 million, only 106 have survived and been graded by the CGC in any condition, and only 12 out of 4 million have been graded in super high grade by the CGC. Of course, there are more copies out there that have not been graded, but it gives us a definite idea of just how rare these books are. And even the higher price tags on the rarity still has not driven them to be graded or surfaced. And yes, Gerber rates that some of these books definitely are, under 100 copies in existence. And that's true for probably this entire list.